Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin, and it is a great honor to have my friend Walter Williams on with me. How are you?
Okay.
For our inaugural show, I said
Walter
I want
Williams.
Walter Williams.
Oh my God.
Now, those who don't know you, all three people out there, you are the John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics at George Mason.
Yes.
We know you as a syndicated columnist, author, numerous books, essays, and so forth.
George
You're a
Mason.
libertarian slash classical liberal, I would say.
Yeah, that's fairly
Is
good.
that about right?
Yes.
And of course, you write for Town Hall, WorldNet Daily, Jewish World Review, hundreds of newspapers across America. Let's jump right into this. Let's start with fundamentals. Let's start with the basics. How would you define liberty?
Well, I defined it as people being able to engage in peaceable, voluntary exchange without interference by others. And typically, and down through mankind's history, liberty is not the normal state of affairs. That is, throughout mankind's history, he's been subject to arbitrary abuse and control by others. And so
Arbitrary
the
abuse.
amount of liberties that Americans have, and perhaps Western Europe as well, the amount of it is relatively rare in humankind. And I think that the danger that we face is that some historian, maybe 200 years from now, he might be writing, he says, well, look, the normal state of affairs has been arbitrary abuse and control by others. And there's this little tiny curiosity where a relatively few people had a large amount of liberty for a short amount of time, but it all went back to the normal state of affairs. That is arbitrary abuse and control by others.
Do you think liberty has the seeds of its own demise, that there's a paradox because people who don't support liberty or who are unwitting about liberty can still use liberty to destroy liberty?
Oh, that's absolutely right. That is, they can use liberty to destroy liberty. They can use if you look at totalitarians around the world, they always start out, they are for free speech. That is because they need free speech to get their foot in the door.
Reverse
But after their
discrimination.
foot is in the door, they want to eliminate free speech. And you see this all over the country. You'll see this all over the world. And we're beginning to see it in the United States. That is, in Berkeley, that was the seed of the
Don't talk
free
about it.
speech
You can't
movement.
talk about it,
And
but
that
it's
was
what you need to
Berkeley.
talk
There
about.
wasn't any free speech whatsoever. So again, I think that we have to be very, very concerned because we're losing our liberty. And if you ask the question, which way are we moving, tiny steps at a time? Are we headed towards more personal liberty or towards more government control over our lives? It'd have to be unambiguously the latter.
You know, when I was about 20 years old, my father and I visited a senator by the name of Paul Laxalt from Nevada. He was very close to Ronald Reagan. And one of the things he said to me that has stuck with me ever since, every day Congress meets, he said, we lose a little bit of our liberty. Now, it wasn't supposed to be that way. The American people largely do not like politicians. The American people largely do not like Congress.
They
And
don't
all the
even
polls
run.
come through, the Congress rates very low. But it seems like when there's a problem, there's a big percentage of the American people on health care or housing or gun laws or what have you, they immediately say government should do something. They don't trust the bureaucracy, they don't trust Washington, they don't trust Congress, but government should do something. How do you explain that paradox?
Well, I think that there's the temptation among all humans to want to live at the expense of somebody else. That is, the American people, and it's sad to say this, is that the American people love to live at the expense of somebody else. That is, whether it be farmers, they want their farm subsidies, poor people, food stamps, businesses, business bailouts. So if let's say in the case of a farmer, if a farmer's having trouble, and if he comes and puts a gun to me and says, give me your money, he's going to go to jail. But if he goes to Washington and gets a congressman to write a law enabling the IRS to take my money, he doesn't go to jail. So what people like to use government to do things that if they did the same thing, they would go to jail. So what I'm saying is that people like to use the government to legalize theft.
And what's interesting about that, too, is it's defined as compassionate. So in other words, using government, the law, the power of government, to take something from someone and give it to somebody else. Or to take something from a generation that's not yet born. You know, we have over $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, $21 trillion in fiscal operating debt. There's going to be $1 trillion deficit this year. They just voted one of the most massive budgets in American history. The Republicans did. The president signed it. 3 generations from now, 2 generations from now, those kids are going to have to deal with this. So even when it comes to their own children and grandchildren, do you think parents who love their children and grandchildren, do you think they delude themselves into thinking, well, that's them, that's this ambiguous future generation, my kids will be fine? What's the mindset?
Well, I think here's
Good
the
question.
problem, is that the big collapse will not come until 2030 or 2040. And
See,
any
he's guilty of it.
Who'll take steps now to prevent the big collapse, he's going to be thrown out of office.
That's what we're all worried about.
The major big problem in
Like
our
the guy from
lives
Chicago with the
is
hair.
Social Security and Medicare. Any congressman talking about doing something about Social Security, doing something about Medicare, he's going to be run out of office. And by the people who are over 65 who vote in large numbers. So we have to ask ourselves the question, is it reasonable for us to expect a politician to do what he considers to be political suicide? I say no. It's unreasonable for us to expect that of a politician.
How do you think Obama got there?
Politicians are running, a congressman, his time horizons is 2 years.
The guy from Chicago with the hair.
Or 20 years. It's 2 years. And so that's what we have to live with.
So that is a circular problem then, because these people will continue to do what they're doing, these politicians. In fact, they grab more and more power from the private sector, from the individual, and yet they don't have the ability, either because of the public or because of their own lack of will, to do what needs to be done 20, 30, 40 years out.
That's right.
So what happens to a
Hey,
country?
you got it.
People will say, well, what can we do? And I ask, well,
What can
are
we do?
the American people, as human beings, are we any different from the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the British, great empires of the past who went down the tubes for doing roughly what we're doing, bread and services? And I say, well, maybe we're not that different, and maybe we're going to share the same future as those other great empires of the past. Keep in mind, we have betrayed the founding fathers of our country. I mean, if you look at Federalist Paper 45, when James Madison was writing Federalist Paper 45, he was trying to convince the citizens of New York to ratify the Constitution, and they were afraid to ratify the Constitution. And he said, the powers that we've delegated to the federal government are few and well-defined and restricted mostly to external affairs. The powers left with the people in the state are indefinite and numerous. If you turn that upside down, we have what we have now. The powers of the federal government are indefinite and numerous.
Would you agree with me that in many respects we now live in to follow up on your point, a post-constitutional period? It's not really a federal republic, since the states live at the behest of the federal government.
Manipulating something I don't know about again?
Massive administrative state
This guy.
with 2 million, civil servants, bureaucrats. And it's not really a constitutional republic when 5 individuals on the court can decide in a 5-4 vote if something is fundamental or not fundamental, or they decide to nationalize an issue, and there's no recourse. What kind of a government is this right now?
What kind of question is that?
It's totalitarianism. That is, I'm not saying that we're a totalitarian nation yet, but which way are we headed? Tiny steps at a time. More government control over our lives, or more liberty. And it's the latter, more government control over our lives.
It's the latter.
And so, and the tragic thing about this is that the American people have contempt for the United States Constitution. Contempt and ignorance, because any politician who decided to uphold and defend the United States Constitution, he would not get elected to office by the American people. That is, if he says, look, nowhere in the Constitution is there authority for the federal government to be involved in education. So if you send me to Washington, I'm not going to bring back billions of dollars in aid to higher education because it's not in the Constitution. He'd be run out of town.